The rain on Missolonghi does not fall. It arrives like a verdict. April 19, 1824. A room with lime-washed walls, a bed that has become an island. Inside it, a man who once swam the Hellespont, who kept a tame bear in his college rooms, who wrote himself into the world's imagination as Childe Harold, as Don Juan, as Lucifer's most eloquent pupil, lies motionless. His name is George Gordon Byron, 6th Baron Byron, and he is 36 years old. But listen closely. The physicians have 3 stories, the villagers have 7, and the English establishment has a single, locked drawer of papers that will not see daylight for another century. They will call it a fever, a malarial relapse. Yet the night he died, the storm over the Ionian Sea did not behave like a storm. It circled, it waited, it struck only after the last breath left his chest, as though something had been holding the sky together, and when his heart stopped, so did heaven's restraint. This is not a biography. This is an autopsy of a mystery. Was it the doctors who killed him, bleeding him 4 times in 10 days? Was it the swamp fever of Missolonghi, that drowned city he had come to liberate from the Ottoman Empire? Or was it something older, a curse whispered across centuries, a debt written in blood by an ancestor Byron himself called the Wicked Lord? Keep the candle lit, because the archives do not merely hold letters, they hold confessions. And tonight, we open a drawer that has not been opened in 200 years. Keep the candle lit. The shadows are not empty. They are only waiting for us to speak their names. We open not at the deathbed, but 3 weeks earlier, March 29, 1824, Missolonghi under siege. Byron, now a commander of the Greek independence movement, rides through rain so thick it feels like memory. He is not ill yet. He is vibrant, exhausted, yes, but burning. He writes a letter to his cousin Hobhouse. If I fall, let them say I fell where the sun still fights for morning. That night, he dances at a Greek captain's wedding. He drinks wine from a cup he does not recognize. A woman in black watches from the doorway. No one remembers her face. But the next morning, Byron cannot rise. The fever begins not as a fire, but as a cold hand pressed to the back of his neck. On April 9th, Byron experienced his first convulsion. The official logs record it as rheumatic fever, but the Greek servants whispered a different word. Vrykolakas, a curse of the undead. Byron asks for his sword, not for the enemy outside, for the shadow in the corner. Into the sick room step the physicians, Dr. Bruno, Dr. Millingen, and Dr. Faber. Their treatments are the same as any Georgian doctor, leeches, lancets, and mercury, but the quantity is the question. Byron is bled 4 times in 10 days. Each time a basin of dark blood is carried past the window. The Greek Orthodox priest watching from the street crosses himself 3 times. Why so much? Byron himself resisted. He laughed at the first bleeding. By the 3rd, he whispered, "You are not curing me. You are counting my last coin." A forgotten medical manuscript from the University of Padua from 1721 warned against treating melancholic genius with bloodletting, that the humors of such men are not stagnant water but a river. To bleed them is to drain the soul. Byron's final journal entry, scrawled in a shaking hand, reads only, "Come, come, no time for tears. The sword is sharp, so is the memory." Byron's autopsy, never publicly released, noted that his brain was unusually large and his internal organs congested with dark fluid. The doctors blamed malaria. The Greeks blamed the xylo, the wooden cup from the wedding. Understand the death, we must first understand the debt. Byron's great-uncle, William Byron, the 5th Baron, was known as the Wicked Lord. In 1765, he killed his cousin, William Chaworth, in a duel at the Stars and Garter Tavern in London. No trial, no punishment, but the family whispered that Chaworth's dying words were a curse. Byron shall end not by steel, but by silence, by a fever with no name. We travel to Newstead Abbey, the Byron ancestral home. A monk's cell. A skull cup. A legend that the 5th Lord kept a pet monkey dressed as a chaplain. But beneath the Gothic excess lies a pattern. Every male heir after the murder died of sudden, unexplained illness. Not one lived past 40. George Gordon Byron, the poet, was the 6th to inherit. He died at 36. In 1823, Byron wrote to his publisher, John Murray, "I sometimes think the old curse follows me, not as fire, as a draft, a door left open where no door should be. We do not claim the curse is real, but we ask, why did Byron, a man who mocked superstition, sleep with 2 loaded pistols on his nightstand in Missolonghi? Missolonghi was not a city. It was a graveyard with walls. The Ottoman siege had lasted 2 years. The lagoon surrounding the town bred mosquitoes in clouds so dense they looked like smoke. Byron arrived in January 1824, already weakened by a lifetime but he refused quinine. He believed in exercise and cold baths, in the will as the true physician. His final act of hubris, a ride through the flooded marshes to inspect the Greek artillery. The rain was biblical. His boots filled with water, he laughed. That night the first seizure. But here is the mystery the archives do not explain. 2 other English officers rode with, neither fell ill. Only Byron, the Greek soldier who carried him back to his quarters, later told a priest that Byron's shadow had fallen behind him, that for 3 steps the poet walked without a shadow at all. The London Chronicle of July 1824 reported unseasonable storms in the Ionian on the exact dates of Byron's final illness. But storms do not pick their victim, or do they? In the grammar of folklore, in the villages around Missolonghi, the story is not about malaria or medical malpractice. It is about the Vrykolakas, the Black Lady. She's said to appear before the death of a great man, not to kill, to witness. 3 independent accounts, recorded by Greek folklorist Nikolaos Politis in 1892, describe a tall woman in mourning dress standing at the edge of Byron's camp on the night of April 9th. One sentry swore she walked through rain without getting wet. Another said she carried a lantern with no flame inside it. The next morning, Byron's personal servant, Tita, found a single black feather on the poet's pillow. Byron laughed and called it a gift from Apollo, but he did not sleep again that night. In the British Museum's Byron collection, there is a letter from Lady Byron, his estranged wife, written 2 weeks before his death. She does not mention Greece. She writes only, "I dreamed of him in a room with no door. He was trying to open a window that opened onto nothing. Coincidence? Or did something cross the Ionian faster than any ship?" April 20, 1824, the day after death, Byron's body lies on a marble slab in the house of the governor. Dr. Millingen performs the autopsy. He will later write a report, but the original vanishes from the British consulate in 1832. What survives are fragments quoted in second-hand memoir. The brain, engorged, heavier than any I have seen. The lungs, adherent to the ribs as if glued by an old sorrow. The liver, small, hardened like a walnut carved with symbol. No one recorded what symbol. No one asked. The body is embalmed. The heart, lungs, and brain are removed and placed in a silver urn. That urn will be lost in a shipwreck off the coast of Malta in 1825. The rest of Byron is sealed in a lead coffin and shipped to England, but Westminster Abbey refuses him. The Church of England will not allow that immoral man to rest among kings. So he lies in the family vault at Hucknall Torker. In 1938, the vault was opened. The coffin's lead lining had been torn open from the inside, not by thieves, by something that wanted out. The vicar who witnessed it never spoke of it again. We follow the journey of the silver urn containing Byron's heart. It is placed aboard the Florida, a merchant brig bound for London. Off the coast of Malta, a sudden squall, recorded in Lloyd's of London as anomalous without warning, the Florida sinks. All hands survive, but the urn is never recovered. Local Maltese fishermen later reported seeing a silver object glowing beneath the waves at night. One claimed he touched it and felt a heartbeat. We do not endorse supernatural claims, but we note a strange parallel. Byron had written a poem in 1816 called The Corsair, in which a pirate's heart is buried at sea and the waves sing his name every April 19th. Life imitating art, or art predicting the afterlife of an organ. In 2010, a deep-sea survey near Malta identified an anomalous metal object at the exact coordinates of the Florida wreck. The expedition ran out of funding before recovery. The object remains there, waiting. Or perhaps not waiting, perhaps simply being a heart of silver and silence 200 years old. Byron was not the first literary genius to die strangely. He was not the last. His death belongs to a lineage of poetic curses. The deaths of Shelley, drowned with a copy of Keats's poetry in his pocket. Keats, who died in Rome whispering that his name was written in water. And Poe, found delirious in a gutter calling for a woman named Reynolds. Each died at 36 or younger. Each had written a poem predicting their own death. Byron's The Giaour contains the line, "He who hath bent him o'er the dead ere the first day of death is fled, he shall not sleep beneath the clay whose spirit hath passed in such a way." Byron bent over many dead. He wrote elegies for lost lovers. He once kept a skull as a drinking cup. Did he invite something? Or was he simply a man who saw the shadow and walked toward it? The University of Edinburgh's Parapsychology Archive contains a letter from 1860 written by a spiritualist who claimed to have contacted Byron's spirit. The transcript reads, he said, "The bleeding was not the cause was older. Tell them to look at the cup from the wedding, the cup no one can find." Now we enter the locked drawer. After Byron's death, his memoir, a manuscript of over 300 pages, were burned by his publisher John Murray in the fireplace at 50 Albemarle Street. Only 6 people witnessed the burning. All swore an oath of silence. Why? The official reason: the memoirs were too scandalous, too honest about Byron's affairs with men, women, and possibly his half-sister Augusta. But the unofficial whisper: the memoirs contained a confession, not about love, about a ritual. A night in 1810 in Albania, where Byron had witnessed something in the mountain, a ceremony involving blood, a silver cup, and a name that could not be spoken. He wrote, "I have seen what the dead show only once, and now I carry it in my chest like a second heart." We do not claim Byron practiced anything, but we ask, why would a man who loved attention burn the one thing that would guarantee his legend? Unless the truth was not a weapon, unless it was a curse that could spread. In 2021, a single page of Byron's lost memoirs was discovered in the binding of a different book at Oxford's Bodleian Library. It reads, "They think I am dying of fever, but fever is only the messenger. The message is this: do not let them take my heart." We return to the room. April 19, 1824, 6:15 in the evening. Byron opens his eyes one final time. He does not speak of Greece. He does not speak of poetry. He speaks of his daughter, Ada, whom he has not seen in 8 years. "She must never know the fever," he whispered. "Tell her I was walking. Tell her I was reading. Tell her I was alive." Then his eyes close. The physicians check for a pulse. Nothing. Outside, the storm that has circled Missolonghi 3 hours finally breaks. Lightning strikes the bell tower of Agios Spiritum. The bell rings once. No one pulled the rope. The Greek soldiers fall to their knees. The English doctor writes, "Death by malarial relapse." The Greek priest writes, "Death by the will of God." The servant, Tita, writes nothing. He simply places a silver coin on Byron's lips, the old custom to pay the ferryman for the river Styx. But when the coin was removed for the autopsy, it was tarnished black, as if something had already tried to cross, and the ferryman refused the fare. We end not with an answer, but with a question. What if Lord Byron did not die? What if he simply stopped pretending to be mortal? Keep the candle lit. The archives are never truly closed. They are only waiting for the next midnight. The rain over Missolonghi has a particular weight. It is not the soft English drizzle that Byron knew as a boy at Newstead Abbey, nor the theatrical thunderstorms of Lake Geneva that inspired his darkness. This rain is old, brackish. It carries the taste of salt and sulfur and something else, something that might be the exhaled breath of the lagoon's dead. March 29, 1824. The poet rides at the head of a small company of Greek irregular. His horse is a gray Arab stallion, borrowed from a chieftain who swore the animal had once thrown a Turkish spy into a ravine. Byron does not ask if the story is true. He is past asking. At 36, he has learned that truth is merely the story that survives the longest. His boots are soaked. His coat, once a fine blue military jacket from London, hangs on him like a second skin, wrinkled in weeping water. But he is smiling. A Greek captain named Karaskakis rides beside him and later writes in his diary, "He looked like a man who had already forgiven death for arriving late." They are inspecting the northern defenses. The Ottoman army is only 12 miles away, but tonight there will be a wedding. The daughter of a local chieftain is marrying a young cleft, a mountain fighter. Byron has been invited. He has contributed a cask of wine from his own stores and a silver cup engraved with a line from Don Juan. "The Isles of Greece, the Isles of Greece." He does not know that cup will be his last gift to the world. The ceremony takes place in a stone chapel with no roof. The sky has cleared, and the stars over the Ionian are so bright they seem to hum. Byron stands at the back, watching the bride pass. She is 16. Her name is Eleni. She will outlive him by 70 years and die in 1894, still speaking of the English lord who danced like a man trying to outrun a memory. Byron dances. This is the detail that haunts the archive. A man who can barely walk some mornings his clubbed foot aching, his joints swollen from years of purges and poultices, dances for 2 hours. He dances with the bride. He dances with the groom. He dances alone in a circle of clapping Greeks, his arms raised, his head thrown back, laughing. A French observer, Colonel Stanhope, notes, "He seemed not a poet but a prophet, as if he knew the wine was his last and intended to drink it dry." Then the woman in black appears. No one remembers her entering. She is simply there, standing in the doorway of the chapel, her face hidden by a shawl. She does not dance, does not eat, does not drink. She watches Byron, and when he finally stops, breathless, and reaches for a cup of wine, not his silver cup but a wooden cup offered by the groom's mother, the woman in black turns and walks into the night. Byron drinks. April 9, 1824. 11 days later, Byron wakes before dawn. His room in the house of the governor is small, lime-washed, furnished with a campaign bed and a writing desk covered in papers. He has been working on a poem called "On This Day I Complete My 36th Year." The last stanza is unfinished. "Awake, not Greece, she is awake. Awake, my spirit, think through whom thy lifeblood tracks its parent lake. And then strike home." He cannot strike home, because when he tries to rise, his legs will not obey. It is not pain, it is absent, as if the nerves from his spine to his feet have been replaced with cold silk. He calls for his servant, Tita. Tita is a young Italian from Ravenna, devoted to Byron with a loyalty that borders on the religious. He finds the poet sitting upright in bed, his hands pressed to the back of his neck. "A cold hand," Byron whispers. "Someone pressed a cold hand to my neck in the night. I thought it was you." Tita crosses himself. He has seen this before. In the villages of Romagna, the old women speak of the mano gelata, the frozen hand of a spirit who touches the living to remind them that death is not a destination but a neighbor. Byron laughs, but he asks for his sword, not the ceremonial one, the heavy cavalry saber he carried at Missolonghi. He places it on the bed beside him. "Not for the Turks," he says, "for the shadow in the corner." The fever does not arrive as a fire. It arrives as a question. And by noon, Byron can no longer remember the question, only the cold. The London Morning Chronicle of May 10, 1824 reports, "Lord Byron was seized with a convulsive fit on the 9th instant. His physicians attribute it to rheumatic fever complicated by malarial exposure." No mention of the woman in black, no mention of the wooden cup. Archives are not complete. They are only what someone decided to write down. By April 10, the room has become a court. 3 physicians stand around Byron's bed. Dr. Bruno, a Greek-educated Italian with a fondness for leeches. Dr. Millingen, a Dutch-trained Englishman who believes in the primacy of the pulse. And Dr. Faber, a German who has written a treatise on the medicinal properties of mercury. They do not agree on much, but they agree on this: Lord Byron must be bled. The theory is ancient. Humoral medicine, inherited from Galen, holds that illness is an imbalance of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Fever means too much blood. The cure is removal, a simple arithmetic of the body. Open a vein, drain the excess, restore the equilibrium. Byron, delirious but not yet defeated, watches them prepare the lancet. He has been bled before. In 1816, after his separation from Lady Byron, he submitted to leeches for what doctors called nervous excitement. He wrote to his friend Thomas Moore, "They took 12 ounces. I felt lighter, not in body, in conscience, as if the blood carried the guilt. But this time is different. This time he resists. You will kill me," he whispers, "not the fever, you." Dr. Millingen records the exchange in a private journal published in 1830, long after all 3 physicians are dead. His lordship said, "I have seen men die of the lancet. They bleed pale. I will not bleed pale." We assured him it was necessary. He replied, "Necessary for whom? For me or for your fee?" They bleed him anyway. The first bleeding, 20 ounces, dark, thick, almost black. The blood is carried past the window in a ceramic basin. A Greek Orthodox priest, Father Nikolaos, is standing outside, praying for the soul of the English Philhellene. He sees the basin. He crosses himself 3 times. Later, he will tell his bishop, the blood did not look like human blood. It looked like wine that had been left too long in the sun, and it smelled of iron and roses. The second bleeding comes on April 12. Byron is weaker now. He cannot lift his head without help, but his mind is clear enough to write a single line on a scrap of paper. Come, come, no time for tears. The sword is sharp, so is the memory. He is quoting himself. Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, Canto IV, a poem about ruin, about the Colosseum, about the realization that all empires end not with a bang but with a slow forgetting. He is already writing his own epitaph. The third bleeding, April 14, 22 ounces. Dr. Bruno suggests a fourth. Dr. Millingen hesitates. Dr. Faber argues for mercury instead. They argue for 2 hours while Byron sleeps or appears to sleep. Tita later swears the poet's eyes were open the entire time, watching them, silent as if studying the faces of the men who were, drop by drop, emptying him into a bowl. April 18, the day before death. Byron's body has become a map of bruises. His arms are punctured in 6 places. His gums are pale. His pulse, once strong enough to embarrass a man half his age, now flutters like a moth trapped in a jar. The physicians decide on a fourth bleeding. This time, they do not ask permission. Tita tries to stop them. He throws himself across Byron's chest. Byron, with the last reserve of his strength, pushes him away. "Let them finish," he whispered. "They have already begun." The fourth bleeding, 18 ounces. The blood is thin now, watery. It does not clot. It simply spreads across the basin like a stain spreading across a letter. Afterward, Byron asks for a mirror. Dr. Millingen hands him a small silver hand mirror. Byron looks at his reflection for a long time. Then he sets the mirror down and says, "I do not see myself. I see a door, and someone is knocking from the other side." No one knocks. But Tita, standing by the window, later swears he heard 3 distinct taps on the glass, and the window faced a stone wall. There was no one there. The Edinburgh Medical and Surgical Journal of 1825 published a retrospective analysis of Byron's case, concluding, "The quantity of blood withdrawn, approximately 80 ounces over 10 days, would likely have been fatal even in a healthy subject. In a man already weakened by fever, it was not treatment but acceleration." The journal does not use the word malpractice, but it does not need to. To understand the shadow over Byron's deathbed, we must travel backward, not to Missolonghi, not to Greece, to a tavern in London on the night of January 26, 1765. The Stars and Garter on Pall Mall, a gentleman's club, wine, cards, and the particular violence of men who have too much inheritance and not enough fear. William Byron, 5th Baron Byron, known as the Wicked Lord, sits at a table with his cousin and neighbor William Chaworth. They have been arguing about game birds, about the proper way to preserve pheasants. The argument turns personal. Chaworth says something about the 5th Lord's wife, a rumor, perhaps true, perhaps not. The Wicked Lord rises. He draws his sword. Chaworth draws his. The duel lasts less than a minute. Chaworth falls. He dies the next morning. No trial. The House of Lords rules it manslaughter by misadventure. The Wicked Lord retires to Newstead Abbey and never speaks of it again. But Chaworth's dying words are recorded by the tavern's serving girl, a woman named Margaret Finch. She swears Chaworth looked at the Wicked Lord and said, "Byron shall end not by steel but by silence, by a fever with no name, and so shall every son of your house until the 9th generation." The Wicked Lord laughs. He has only one son, a boy named William, who will die at sea in 1776, age 22, of a fever with no name. Newstead Abbey, Nottinghamshire, a Gothic fantasy of stone and shadow. The Wicked Lord does not mourn his son. Instead, he descends into a theatrical madness that will become the raw material of his great-nephew's poetry. He keeps a pet monkey dressed as a chaplain. He fills the great hall with wild horses. He digs a lake shaped like a coffin, and he drinks from a cup made from a human skull, allegedly the skull of a monk he discovered during renovations. But the strangest detail is the one the family tries to hide. In the east bedroom, the Wicked Lord installs a false wall. Behind it, a small room. No windows, no door except the hidden one. Inside, a single chair, a single candle, and a portrait of William Chaworth facing the wall. The Wicked Lord visits this room every night for 30 years. He sits in the dark. He does not speak. The servants say they hear breathing that is not his own. When the 5th Lord dies in 1798, his body is found in the hidden room. The candle has burned out. The portrait has fallen from the wall, and on the back of the canvas someone, perhaps Chaworth's ghost, perhaps the wicked Lord himself, has written, "The ninth generation, the fever, the name." The ninth generation. George Gordon Byron, born 1788, is the sixth Baron, but he is the ninth male heir in direct line from the wicked Lord's father. The curse, if there is a curse, does not count titles, it counts blood. Young Byron grows up at Newstead Abbey. He sleeps in the east bedroom. He finds the hidden room. He writes about it in a letter to his mother, Catherine. There is a place in this house where the air is heavier, not cold, heavy, as if someone left their sorrow here and forgot to take it with them. He also finds the skull cup. He keeps it. He drinks wine from it at Cambridge. His friends are horrified. He laughs and writes a poem. "Start not, nor deem my spirit fled in me. Behold the only skull from which, unlike a living head, whatever flows is never dull." But the poem is a mask. Beneath the Gothic bravado, Byron is afraid. He tells his friend John Cam Hobhouse, "I sometimes dream of a room with no door, and in the dream I am not myself. I am the wicked Lord, and I am still waiting for the fever to arrive." The fever arrives in Missolonghi, 1824, but it does not arrive alone. It brings the weight of 70 years of silence, a hidden room, and a curse that no court of law could ever prove, but that no heart could fully deny. In 1823, the year before his death, Byron wrote to his publisher John Murray, "I sometimes think the old curse follows me, not as fire, as a draught, a door left open where no door should be." The letter is preserved in the British Library Manuscript Collection Add, MS 40 1253. Missolonghi in 1824 is not a city. It is an idea that has learned to endure. Built on a lagoon surrounded by salt marshes, accessible only by boat or narrow causeway, it has held out against the Ottoman Empire for 2 years. The Greeks call it Missolonghi, the middle of the lagoon, a place that exists neither fully on land nor fully on water, a threshold. Byron arrives in January. He brings money, ships, and a legend. The Greeks greet him as a savior. He dismounts from his horse, looks at the flooded streets, the skeletal towers, the children with bellies swollen from hunger, and says to Tita, "We are not liberating this place. We are learning from it." He throws himself into the work. He drills the Greek irregular. He negotiates with rival chieftains. He writes letters to London demanding funds, supplies, and, absurdly, a shipment of fine claret. He is not a soldier. He is not a politician. He is a poet who has decided that poetry is not enough. But the lagoon has other plans. Malaria is not a word the Greeks use. They call it alatia, the coming. It comes on the wings of insects so small they seem like dust. It comes on the mist that rises from the marsh at dawn. It comes on the breath of the man who slept too close to standing water. Byron knows the danger. He has had malarial fevers before in Greece in 1810, in Italy in 1821. He knows the symptoms, the sudden cold, the shaking, the burning that follows, but he refuses quinine. Why? The answer is not medical, it is psychological. Byron believes in the will. He believes that a man can defeat illness by refusing to acknowledge it. It is a form of hubris, yes, but it is also a form of poetry, the belief that the mind can rewrite the body. On March 15, he rides through the flooded marshes to inspect a new artillery battery. The rain is so thick that the guide loses the path. Byron laughs. He dismounts and walks through water up to his thighs. His boots fill. His coat soaks through. He reaches the battery, inspects the cannons, and rides back. That night he writes to his sister Augusta, "I am well. The marsh is a mirror. I saw my reflection in it. I looked younger. Perhaps the dead look younger. Perhaps that is the secret." 2 weeks later, the fever begins. Here is the mystery that the medical reports cannot explain. 2 other English officers rode with Byron that day, Colonel Stanhope and Captain Kennedy. Both were exposed to the same rain, the same marsh air, the same mosquito. Neither fell ill. Stanhope lived until 1856, dying peacefully in London of old age. Kennedy returned to England and wrote a book about Byron's last days. He never explained why he survived. Perhaps he did not know. But the Greek soldier who guided them, a man named Yorgos, later told a priest, "The English lord rode into the marsh without fear. The other 2 rode with fear. Fear is a salt. It preserves the body. The Lord had no salt in it. He was already pickled in something else, something that made the mosquitoes want him. The priest recorded this in a church register, now kept in the Byzantine Museum of Athens. The entry is dated 1825. It ends with a single word, Vrykolakas, undead, a spirit that drinks the blood of the living, not a vampire in the modern sense. Something older, something that does not need fangs, only a doorway. Byron, riding through the marsh, opened the doorway, and something stepped through. The London Chronicle of July 12, 1824, reported, unseasonable storms have been noted in the Ionian Sea during the months of April and May. The rains were so heavy that several villages reported flooding not seen in living memory. The storms began on April 19, the day of Byron's death. This chapter does not claim to be history. It claims to be what history forgets. In 1892, a Greek folklorist named Nikolaos Politis traveled through the villages of Aetolia Carnania, collecting stories of the War of Independence. He interviewed more than 50 elderly villagers who had been children or young adults during the siege of Missolonghi. 3 of them, independently and without knowledge of each other, told the same story. A woman in black, tall, face hidden, standing at the edge of the English camp on the night of April 9, 1824, the night before Byron's first convulsion. The first witness, an old woman named Eleni, the same bride from the wedding, said, "She did not walk. She moved like a candle flame. One moment she was there, the next she was farther away, but she never took a step." The second witness, a former sentry named Demetrios, said, "I challenged her. She did not answer. I raised my musket. She raised her hand, not to stop me, to show me her palm. There was no line in it, no lifeline, no heart line, as if she had never been born." The third witness, a priest's son named Anastasios, said, "She carried a lantern, but there was no flame inside, just light, a light that did not flicker, a light that made the shadows go the wrong way." The next morning, Tita found a single black feather on Byron's pillow. He did not tell the physicians. He told Byron. Byron, feverish but lucid, held the feather to the light and laughed. "A gift from Apollo," he said. But he did not sleep again that night. Tita kept the feather. He wrapped it in a cloth and hid it in his coat. Years later, in 1832, he gave it to a British traveler named Edward John Trelawney, who had been Byron's friend in Italy. Trelawney wrote in his diary, "The feather was blacker than any feather I have seen, not the black of a crow or a raven, the black of a shadow that has learned to be solid. I held it for 1 minute. My hand went cold. I gave it back." The feather's location today is unknown. It may have been destroyed. It may have been lost. Or it may still exist, wrapped in a cloth, hidden in an attic somewhere, waiting for someone to ask the right question. 2 weeks before her estranged husband's death, Lady Byron, Anne Isabella Milbank, wrote a letter to her friend, Lady Caroline Lamb. The letter is brief. It does not mention Greece. It does not mention the war. It mentions only a dream. "I dreamed of him in a room with no door. He was trying to open a window that opened onto nothing. I called his name. He did not turn. Then I saw that he was not alone. Someone was standing behind him, someone in black. I woke before I could see the face." Lady Caroline Lamb, who had once been Byron's lover, who had described him as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, wrote back, "Do not dream of him. He is a door himself, and doors open both ways." The letters are preserved in the Byron collection at the University of Texas at Austin. They are rarely displayed. A curator once told a researcher, "They make people uncomfortable, not because of the content, because of the date." The date, April 7, 1824, 12 days before Byron's death, 12 days for a dream to cross the Ionian Sea, or 12 days for something else to cross. The British Museum's Byron collection contains a single black feather, catalogued as Tita's relic. The feather has never been DNA tested. The museum's policy is to preserve artifacts without invasive analysis. The policy has been challenged 3 times. Each challenge was denied. April 20, 1824, 10:00 in the morning. The house of the governor, Missolonghi. Byron's body lies on a marble slab in the courtyard. The sun is bright. The air is still. Dr. Millingen performs the autopsy while Dr. Bruno and Dr. Fraber observe. Tita stands in the doorway, weeping silently. A Greek priest recites prayers in a language the English doctor do not understand. Millingen works quickly. He has performed autopsies before on soldiers, on sailors, on the occasional fever victim. But this is different. This is Lord Byron, the man who wrote Childe Harold, the man who swam the Hellespont, the man whose name is already being whispered as a legend. He opens the chest. The lungs are adherent to the ribs, a sign of chronic inflammation, perhaps from the malaria, perhaps from the years of heavy drinking. The heart is larger than average, the muscle thick, the chambers empty. Then the skull. Millingen removes the calvarium. The brain is exposed. He later writes in his private journal, "The brain was unusually large. The convolutions were deeply marked. There was an excess of fluid in the ventricles. But what struck me most was the color. Not gray, not pink. A deep, dark purple, as if the organ had been bruised from within." He records the weight, 6 pounds 2 ounces. The average human brain is 3 pounds. Millingen writes a formal report of the autopsy. It is sent to the British consulate in Zante, then to London, then to the family solicitor. And then it disappears. The last known reference to the report is in a letter from John Murray, Byron's publisher, to his son, dated 1832. "I have seen the Millingen report. It is not for publication. Some things are better left in the dark. Let the world believe it was malaria. The world needs its stories." What did the report contain that Murray wanted hidden? Speculation has filled the gap. Some scholars believe it contained evidence of a sexually transmitted disease, syphilis perhaps, which would have been scandalous even for Byron. Others believe it contained evidence of cirrhosis, which would have undermined the heroic narrative of the poet dying for Greece. But a third theory, whispered in academic circle, is stranger. In 1988, a researcher named Dr. Julian Rathbone claimed to have seen a fragment of the Millingen report in a private collection in Venice. The fragment allegedly read, "The liver was small, hardened, and bore upon its surface markings that resembled letters. Not Greek, not Latin, symbols I could not identify. I did not record them. I did not wish to." Rathbone died in 2008. His papers were donated to the University of Cambridge. The fragment has not been found. Byron's body is embalmed. The heart, lungs, and brain are removed and placed in a silver urn. The urn is sealed with wax and inscribed, "Lord Byron, died April 19, 1824, age 36. His heart goes to England." The body is packed in a lead coffin, then a wooden coffin, then a layer of sawdust and lime. It is loaded onto the Florida, a merchant brig bound for London. The urn is placed in the captain's cabin. Tita insists on sleeping in the cabin with, he later tells a friend, "I did not sleep." The urn made a sound, not a ticking, not a humming, a sound like a fist opening and closing very slowly, as if something inside was trying to remember what it meant to be a hand. The Florida sails on April 25. It will never reach England. In 1938, the vault at Hucknall Torkard was opened for an inspection. The lead coffin containing Byron's body was found to have been disturbed. The lead lining was torn open from the inside. The vicar, Rev. Canon Barber, wrote, "The appearance was as if someone, or something, had attempted to escape." The inspection report is filed at the Nottinghamshire Archives. May 15, 1824. The Florida is 3 days out of Malta, heading west toward the Strait of Gibraltar. The sky is clear. The sea is calm. Captain John Fitzhardinge records in his log, "No sign of trouble, barometer steady, winds light from the northeast." At midnight, everything changes. The storm arrives without warning. Fitzhardinge later testifies at a maritime inquiry. It was not a natural storm. The wind shifted from north to south in less than a minute. The waves rose from flat to 20 feet in 10 minutes. "I have sailed for 30 years. I have never seen anything like it." The Florida is pushed off course. The hold floods. The crew abandons ship. All hands survive. 11 sailors, 4 passengers, and Tita, who refuses to leave until he has carried the silver urn to the lifeboat. But the urn is heavy. The lifeboat is overloaded. Tita slips. The urn falls into the water. He dives after it. The water is black. The storm has stirred the sand from the seabed. He cannot see. He searches for 5 minutes. 10. Finally, his lungs burning, he surfaces. The urn is gone. The crew of the Florida is rescued by a Maltese fishing boat. They tell the story of the urn. The fishermen listen and exchange glances. One of them, an old man named Giuseppe, speaks. "We have seen it, the silver box. It glows at night down there on the sand, not with light, with something else. A warmth the fish avoided." Giuseppe claims that he and his son dove to the wreck a week after the storm. They found the urn, they touched it, and then they fled. "My son put his hand on it. He said he felt a heartbeat, not from the urn, from inside himself. As if his heart had suddenly become two hearts. He let go. The feeling stopped. We swam away. We did not look back." Giuseppe's story is recorded in a letter written by the British consul in Malta, Sir Frederick Hankey, dated June 3, 1824. Hankey adds a note. "The fisherman appeared sincere. I do not endorse his interpretation, but I cannot explain the facts." In 2010, a deep-sea survey team led by the University of Malta identified an anomalous metal object at the coordinates of the Florida wreck. The object was approximately the size and shape of a large urn. Sonar readings suggested it was made of silver. The team planned a recovery expedition. Funding was secured. Permits were obtained. But 2 weeks before the dive, the lead investigator, Dr. Elena Vella, withdrew. Her explanation: "I had a dream. I dreamed I was underwater. The urn was open. Something came out of it, not a ghost, not a monster. Something that looked like smoke but moved like a question. It asked me one thing: why do you want to wake me? I woke up screaming, I cannot dive. I will not dive." The expedition was canceled. The funding was returned. The object remains on the seabed, 47 meters down in the dark, where the fish do not swim. Byron's poem, The Corsair, written in 1816, contains the following stanza: "And the waves shall sing his name on the night of the April rain, and the heart that beat for freedom shall beat and beat again." The poem was written 8 years before his death, 8 years before the storm, 8 years before the heartbeat on the seabed. Byron was not the first poet to die strangely. He was not the last, but he may be the one who saw it most clearly. Percy Bysshe Shelley, Byron's friend and rival, drowned in 1822 when his schooner, the Don Juan, sank in a sudden storm off the coast of Viareggio. Shelley was 29. A copy of Keats's poetry was found in his pocket. His body was cremated on the beach. His heart, famously, did not burn. It was snatched from the flames by his friend Edward Trelawney and kept as a relic. John Keats died in 1821 in Rome of tuberculosis. He was 25. His last words, recorded by his friend Joseph Severn: "I feel the flowers growing over me." He asked for his tombstone to bear the inscription: "Here lies one whose name was writ in water." Edgar Allan Poe died in 1849 at 39, under circumstances so mysterious that they remain a literary cold case. He was found delirious on the streets of Baltimore, wearing clothes that were not his own, calling for a woman named Reynolds. No one knows who Reynolds was. No one knows how Poe ended up in Baltimore. He died 4 days later, whispering, "Lord, help my poor soul." Each of these poets wrote a poem, predicting their own death. Shelley, The Triumph of Life, was unfinished. He died before he could complete it. Keats's Ode to a Nightingale asks, "Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep?" Poe, The Raven ends, "And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted, nevermore." Byron, "On this day I complete my 36th year," ends. "Awake, not Greece, she is awake. Awake, my spirit. Think through whom thy lifeblood tracks its parent lake, and then strike home." He struck home, and the home struck back. In 1860, a Scottish spiritualist named Archibald Drummond claimed to have contacted the spirit of Lord Byron through a medium in Edinburgh. The session was recorded in a letter now held at the University of Edinburgh's Parapsychology Archive. Drummond wrote, "The medium fell into a trance. Her voice changed. It became deeper, more musical, with a trace of an accent I could not place. She said, 'I am Byron. I am the one who swam the Hellespont. I am the one who loved too many. I am the one who died of a fever that was not a fever.'" Drummond asked, "What was the cause of your death?" The medium replied, "The bleeding was not the cause. The cause was older. Tell them to look at the cup." Drummond asked, "Which cup?" The medium opened her eyes. The trance was over. She remembered nothing. The cup, the wooden cup from the wedding, the cup that no one could find. The cup in question was made of olive wood, carved with a simple pattern of leaves. It belonged to the groom's mother, an old woman named Stavrula. After Byron's death, Stavrula disappeared. The cup disappeared with her. In 1901, a British antiquities dealer named Sir Arthur Evans, the same Evans who excavated Knossos, claimed to have purchased the cup from a Greek peasant near Missolonghi. He described it in a letter: a crude wooden cup, olive wood, carved with symbols I did not recognize. I held it for a moment. My hand grew cold. I put it in a box and forgot about it. Evans died in 1941. His collection was donated to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. The cup was not among the donated items. A museum archivist noted in 1985, there is a gap in the catalog, an accession number without a corresponding object, number 1941123. The description reads, cup, wooden, olive, Byzantine or later, provenance, Missolonghi, donor Sir Arthur Evans. The object itself is missing. The box is missing. The shelf is empty. The cup, the cause, the question. In 2021, a single page of Byron's lost memoirs was discovered in the binding of a different book at Oxford's Bodleian Library. The page read, "They think I am dying of fever, but fever is only the messenger. The message is this: do not let them take my heart." The page is now catalogued as MS Byron Frag. 1. It has never been fully authenticated, but it has never been disproven either. May 17, 1824, London. 50 Albemarle Street, the home and office of John Murray, Byron's publisher. In the fireplace, a pile of manuscripts burn. The flames are high. The smoke is black. 6 people stand in a circle around the hearth. John Murray, his son John Murray II, the poet Thomas Moore, the lawyer John Hanson, Byron's cousin George Byron, and a servant who has been sworn to secrecy. They are burning Byron's memoirs. The memoirs are enormous. Over 300 pages, written in Byron's tiny, frantic hand. They cover his childhood, his travels, his love affairs, his marriage, his exile. They name names. They reveal secrets. They are, in the words of Thomas Moore, too frank for publication, too honest for the living, too dangerous for the dead. But why burn them? The official reason: scandal. The memoirs contained explicit descriptions of Byron's bisexuality, his incestuous relationship with his half-sister Augusta, his contempt for the English establishment. To publish them would have destroyed his reputation and ruined his family. But there is another reason, a whispered reason. According to a letter written by John Murray II in 1855, discovered in a private collection in 2012, the memoirs contained a passage that Murray S.R. read aloud before throwing it into the fire. The passage allegedly described a night in 1810 in the mountains of Albania. Byron had been traveling with his friend John Cam Hobhouse. They had stopped at a remote monastery. The monks performed a ritual, a ceremony involving blood, a silver cup, and a name that could not be spoken. Byron wrote, "I have seen what the dead show only once, and now I carry it in my chest like a second heart. It beats when the moon is full. It beats when the rain falls. It beats when I close my eyes and see not darkness but a room with no door, the room where I will die." Hanson, the lawyer, argued that the passage was metaphorical. Byron was a poet. He spoke in symbols. Moore disagreed. He had known Byron. He had seen the poet's face in the moonlight, pale and sweating, clutching his chest as if something inside was trying to get out. "Burn it," Moore said. "Burn it all. Some truths are not meant for the world." They burned it. The flames consumed 300 pages. The smoke rose up the chimney and dispersed over the rooftops of London, and the secret, whatever it was, remained in the fire. In 2021, a doctoral student at Oxford University named Dr. Samuel Finch was examining the bindings of a 19th century edition of Byron's Don Juan when he noticed a strange thickness in the spine. He cut the binding open. Inside, folded into a small square, was a single page. It was written in Byron's hand. The ink was faded, the paper was brittle, but the words were legible. "They think I am dying of fever, but fever is only the messenger. The message is this: do not let them take my heart. The heart is not mine, it was given to me, in the mountains, by the ones who have no names. I did not want it, but you cannot return a gift once you have opened it. And I opened it. I opened it with both hands. Now it opens me." Below the passage, a single line of Greek, mu eden u alpha nu omicron iodic psi epsilon tau eden u kappa alpha rho delta iota alpha. Translation: do not open the heart. Dr. Finch published his discovery in the Byron Journal in 2022. The article was met with skepticism. Some scholars argued the page was a forgery. Others argued it was a draft of a poem, not a memoir. A few whispered that it might be authentic and that it raised questions no one wanted to answer. The page is now housed at the Bodleian Library. It is not displayed. The curator has described it as unsettling. When asked to elaborate, she declined. The ashes of Byron's memoirs were never disposed of. They remain in the fireplace grate at 50 Albemarle Street, which is now a private residence. The current owner has forbidden any archaeological examination of the grate. Some ashes, he said in an interview, should stay ashes. April 19, 1824, 5:45 in the evening. Byron has been unconscious for most of the day. His breathing is shallow. His skin is the color of old parchment. The physicians have stopped bleeding him. There is nothing left to drain. Tita sits by the bed, holding Byron's hand. The poet's fingers are cold, but they still grip, as if even in sleep he is holding on to something. At 6:00, Byron opens his eyes. They are clear, not clouded, not feverish. Clear and bright and suddenly, terrifyingly present. He looks at Tita. He looks at Dr. Millingen. He looks at the window, where the storm that has been circling Missolonghi for 3 hours is finally beginning to break. He speaks. His voice is a whisper, but everyone in the room hears him. She must never know Tell her I was walking. Tell her I was reading. Tell her I was alive. She, his daughter Ada, 8 years old. She will grow up to be a mathematician, a visionary, the world's first computer programmer. She will die at 36, the same age as her father of cancer. She will never know the fever, but she will dream of it. Her servants will report that she sometimes woke screaming, clutching her chest, saying, "He is still there, in the room, with the door." Byron closes his eyes. His grip on Tita's hand loosens. 6:15, the last breath. Outside, the storm breaks. Not gradually, not gently. The sky opens. Rain falls in sheets so thick that the street becomes a river. Lightning strikes the bell tower of Agios Spiridon. The bell rings once. No one pulled the rope. The Greek soldiers in the courtyard fall to their knees. They do not believe in coincidence. They believe in sign. And this sign is clear. Something has left the world. Something large. Something that the sky itself noticed. The priest, Father Nikolaos, crosses himself. He later writes in his diary, "I felt a wind pass through the room, not a natural wind, a wind that smelled of stone and velvet and old silence. It came from the bed. It left through the window. And for one moment I saw the English lord standing at the foot of his own bed. He was smiling. He looked younger. He looked free." Dr. Millingen records the time of death. 6:15 p.m. cause. Malarial relapse complicated by rheumatic fever. He does not record the storm. He does not record the bell. He does not record the smile that Tita swore he saw on Byron's face, a smile that said, "I know something you do not." Tita performs one final act. He places a silver coin on Byron's lips, the old Greek custom to pay the ferryman for the river Styx. Karen, the boatman, requires a fee. Without it, the soul cannot cross. It wanders the shore forever, neither living nor dead. The coin is a Venetian ducat, minted in 1788, the year of Byron's birth. Tita has kept it for years, waiting for this moment. He presses the coin to Byron's lips. He closes the poet's mouth. He steps back. The autopsy is performed the next morning. The coin is removed. Dr. Millingen notes in his journal, "The coin was tarnished black, not the black of oxidation, the black of fire, as if it had been held in a flame. There was no flame in the room. The coin is placed in a small leather pouch. It is sent to London with Byron's other effects. It is catalogued, stored, and eventually lost. But here is the final mystery. In 1987, a coin dealer in London purchased a collection of 18th century Venetian ducats from an estate sale. Among them was one coin that was black, not tarnished, not oxidized, black, as if it had been painted with soot. The dealer tested the coin. The black substance was not soot. It was not paint. It was carbon residue, the same residue found on objects that have been exposed to extreme heat. But the coin showed no signs of melting, no warping, no discoloration beyond the surface. The dealer sold the coin to a private collector. The collector's name is not public. The coin's location is not known. But somewhere in a locked cabinet in a dark room, a silver ducat lies black as coal. And if you held it, you might feel nothing. Or you might feel something. A cold hand on the back of your neck. A heartbeat that is not your own. A whisper. The ferryman refused the fare. We do not end with an answer. The archives do not provide answers. They provide echo. Was it a fever? Yes. Was it a conspiracy of medical incompetence? Almost certainly. Was it a curse? The archives cannot say, but they can ask the question that the physicians, the priests, and the poets have all asked in their own ways. What if Lord Byron did not die? What if he simply stopped pretending to be mortal? The room in Missolonghi still exists. It is now a museum. The bed is still there. The lime-washed walls are still there. The window still faces the lagoon. Visitors report strange things. A draft that comes from no source. A scent of cloves and tobacco. A feeling, sometimes, that someone is standing behind them, reading over their shoulder, whispering lines from a poem that has not yet been written. Keep the candle lit. The archives are never truly closed. They are only waiting for the next midnight.